We now present The Poor Relations Story, written by Charles Dickens. First, let us consider a few points that will enrich the listening experience. Charles Dickens's The Poor Relations Story was first published in the 1852 Christmas issue of his magazine, Household Words, as a part of the collaborative anthology, A Round of Christmas Stories. Written during a period when Dickens was deeply invested in social reform and illuminating the plight of the Victorian poor, this narrative tackles the psychological and emotional toll of gentility lost. When tuning into this audiobook, listeners should pay close attention to the subtle shifts in the narrative voice, moving from the self-effacing, melancholic reality of a marginalized family member to the vivid, emotionally heightened tonality of his splendid, defiant, inward fantasies. We will now begin the reading. He was very reluctant to take precedence of so many respected members of the family by beginning the round of stories they were to relate as they sat in a goodly circle by the Christmas fire. And he modestly suggested that it would be more correct if John, our esteemed host, whose health he begged to drink, would have the kindness to begin. For as to himself, he said, he was so little used to lead the way that really he could not. But as they all cried out here that he must begin, and agreed with one voice that he might, could, would, and should begin, he left off rubbing his hands, took his legs out from under his armchair, and did begin. "I have no doubt," said the poor relation, "that I shall surprise the assembled members of our family, and particularly John, our esteemed host, to whom we are so much indebted for the great hospitality with which he has this day entertained us, by the confession I am going to make. But if you do me the honor to be surprised at anything that falls from a person so unimportant in the family as I am, I can only say that I shall be scrupulously accurate in all I relate. I am not what I am supposed to be. I am quite another thing. Perhaps before I go further, I had better glance at what I am supposed to be. It is supposed, unless I mistake, and the assembled members of our family will correct me if I do, which is very likely. Here the poor relation looked mildly about him for contradiction. That I am nobody's enemy, but my own. That I never met with any particular success in anything. That I failed in business because I was unbusinesslike and credulous in not being prepared for the interested designs of my partner. That I failed in love because I was ridiculously trustful in thinking it impossible that Christiana could deceive me. That I failed in my expectations from my Uncle Chill on account of not being as sharp as he could have wished in worldly matters. That through life I have been rather put upon and disappointed in a general way. That I am at present a bachelor of between 59 and 60 years of age, living on a limited income in the form of a quarterly allowance, to which I see that John, our esteemed host, wishes me to make no further allusion. The supposition as to my present pursuits and habits is to the following effect. I live in a lodging in the Clapham Road, a very clean back room in a very respectable house, where I am expected not to be at home in the daytime, unless poorly, and which I usually leave in the morning at 9 o'clock on pretense of going to business. I take my breakfast, my roll and butter, and my half-pint of coffee at the old established coffee shop near Westminster Bridge. And then I go into the city, I don't know why,
and sit in Garraway's coffee house, and on 'Change, and walk about, and look into a few offices and counting houses where some of my relations or acquaintances are so good as to tolerate me, and where I stand by the fire if the weather happens to be cold. I get through the day in this way until 5 o'clock, and then I dine, at a cost on the average of 1 3 pence. Having still a little money to spend on my evening's entertainment, I look into the old-established coffee shop as I go home, and take my cup of tea and perhaps my bit of toast. So, as the large hand of the clock makes its way round to the morning hour again, I make my way round to the Clapham Road again, and go to bed when I get to my lodging. Fire being expensive and being objected to by the family on account of its giving trouble and making a dirt. Sometimes one of my relations or acquaintances is so obliging as to ask me to dinner. Those are holiday occasions, and then I generally walk in the park. I am a solitary man, and seldom walk with anybody. Not that I am avoided because I am shabby. For I am not at all shabby, having always a very good suit of black on, or rather Oxford mixture, which has the appearance of black and wears much better. But I have got into a habit of speaking low and being rather silent, and my spirits are not high, and I am sensible that I am not an attractive companion. The only exception to this general rule is the child of my first cousin, little Frank. I have a particular affection for that child, and he takes very kindly to me. He is a diffident boy by nature, and in a crowd he is soon run over, as I may say, and forgotten. He and I, however, get on exceedingly well. I have a fancy that the poor child will in time succeed to my peculiar position in the family. We talk but little, still we understand each other. We walk about, hand in hand, and without much speaking, he knows what I mean, and I know what he means. When he was very little indeed, I used to take him to the windows of the toy shops and show him the toys inside. It is surprising how soon he found out that I would have made him a great many presents if I had been in circumstances to do it. Little Frank and I go and look at the outside of the monument, for he is very fond of the monument, and at the bridges, and at all the sights that are free. On 2 of my birthdays, we have dined on a la mode beef, and gone at half price to the play, and been deeply interested. I was once walking with him in Lombard Street, which we often visit on account of my having mentioned to him that there are great riches there. He is very fond of Lombard Street. As we walked, a gentleman said to me as he passed by, "Sir, your little son has dropped his glove." I assure you, if you will excuse my remarking on so trivial a circumstance, this accidental mention of the child as mine quite touched my heart and brought the foolish tears into my eyes. When little Frank is sent to school in the country, I shall be very much at a loss what to do with myself, but I have the intention of walking down there once a month and seeing him on a half-holiday. I am told he will then be at play upon the heath, and if my visits should be objected to as unsettling the child, I can see him from a distance without his seeing me, and walk back again. His mother comes of a highly genteel family, and rather disapproves, I am aware, of our being too much together. I know that I am not calculated to improve his retiring disposition, but I think he would miss me beyond the feeling of the moment if we were wholly separated. When I die in the Clapham Road, I shall not leave much more in this world than I shall take out of it. But I happened to have a miniature of a bright-faced boy with a curling head and an open shirt frill waving down his bosom. My mother had it taken for me, but I can't believe that it was ever like me, which will be worth nothing to sell, and which I shall beg may be given to Frank. I have written my dear boy a little letter with it, in which I have told him that I felt very sorry to part from him, though bound to confess that I knew no reason why I should remain here. I have given him some short advice, the best in my power, to take warning of the consequences of being nobody's enemy but his own. And I have endeavored to comfort him for what I fear he will consider a bereavement, by pointing out to him that I was only a superfluous something to everyone but him, and that having by some means failed to find a place in this great assembly, I am better out of it. Such, said the poor relation, clearing his throat and beginning to speak a little louder, is the general impression about me. Now it is a remarkable circumstance which forms the aim and purpose of my story, that this is all wrong. This is not my life, and these are not my habits. I do not even live in the Clapham Road. Comparatively speaking, I am very seldom there. I reside, mostly, in a place I am almost ashamed to name. It sounds so full of pretension. A castle. I do not mean that it is an old baronial habitation, but still it is a building always known to everyone by the name of a castle. In it, I preserve the particulars of my history. They run thus. It was when I first took John Spatter, who had been my clerk, into partnership, and when I was still a young man of not more than 25, residing in the house of my Uncle Chill, from whom I had considerable expectations, that I ventured to propose to Christiana. I had loved Christiana a long time. She was very beautiful and very winning in all respects. I rather mistrusted her widowed mother, who I feared was of a plotting and mercenary turn of mind, but I thought as well of her as I could, for Christiana's sake. I never had loved anyone but Christiana, and she had been all the world, and oh, far more than all the world, to me from our childhood. Christiana accepted me with her mother's consent, and I was rendered very happy indeed. My life at my Uncle Chill's was of a spare, dull kind, and my garret chamber was as dull and bare and cold as an upper prison room in some stern northern fortress. But having Christiana's love, I wanted nothing upon earth. I would not have changed my lot with any human being. Avarice was, unhappily, my Uncle Chill's master vice. Though he was rich, he pinched and scraped and clutched and lived miserably. As Christiana had no fortune, I was for some time a little fearful of confessing our engagement to him, but at length I wrote him a letter, saying how it all truly was. I put it into his hand one night on going to bed. As I came downstairs next morning, shivering in the cold December air, colder in my uncle's unwarmed house than in the street, where the winter sun did sometimes shine, and which was at all events enlivened by cheerful faces and voices passing along, I carried a heavy heart towards the long, low breakfast room in which my uncle sat. It was a large room with a small fire, and there was a great bay window in it, which the rain had marked in the night as if with the tears of houseless people. It stared upon a raw yard, with a cracked stone pavement and some rusted iron railings half uprooted. Whence an ugly outbuilding that had once been a dissecting room in the time of the great surgeon who had mortgaged the house to my uncle stared at it. We rose so early always that at that time of the year we breakfasted by candlelight. When I went into the room, my uncle was so contracted by the cold and so huddled together in his chair behind the one dim candle that I did not see him until I was close to the table. As I held out my hand to him, he caught up his stick. Being infirm, he always walked about the house with a stick, and made a blow at me, and said, "You fool." "Uncle," I returned, "I didn't expect you to be so angry as this." Nor had I expected it, though he was a hard and angry old man. "You didn't expect?" said he. "When did you ever expect? When did you ever calculate or look forward, you contemptible dog?"
"These are hard words, Uncle."
"Hard words? Feathers to pelt such an idiot as you with," said he. "Here, Betsy Snap, look at him." Betsy Snap was a withered, hard-favored, yellow old woman. She was our only domestic and was always employed, at this time of the morning, in rubbing my uncle's legs. As my uncle adjured her to look at me, he put his lean grip on the crown of her head, she kneeling beside him, and turned her face towards me. An involuntary thought connecting them both with the dissecting room, as it must often have been in the surgeon's time, passed across my mind in the midst of my anxiety. "Look at the sniveling milksop," said my uncle. "Look at the baby. This is the gentleman who, people say, is nobody's enemy but his own. This is the gentleman who can't say no. This is the gentleman who was making such large profits in his business that he must needs take a partner the other day. This is the gentleman who is going to marry a wife without a penny, and who falls into the hands of Jezebels who are speculating on my death." I knew now how great my uncle's rage was. For nothing short of his being almost beside himself would have induced him to utter that concluding word, which he held in such repugnance that it was never spoken or hinted at before him on any account. "On my death," he repeated, as if he were defying me by defying his own abhorrence of the word. "On my death! 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 But I'll spoil the speculation. Eat your last under this roof, you feeble wretch, and may it choke you." You may suppose that I had not much appetite for the breakfast to which I was bidden in these terms, but I took my accustomed seat. I saw that I was repudiated henceforth by my uncle. Still, I could bear that very well, possessing Christiana's heart. He emptied his basin of bread and milk as usual, only that he took it on his knees, with his chair turned away from the table where I sat. When he had done, he carefully snuffed out the candle, and the cold, slate-colored, miserable day looked in upon us. "Now, Mr. Michael," said he, "before we part, I should like to have a word with these ladies in your presence." "As you will, sir," I returned, "but you deceive yourself and wrong us cruelly if you suppose that there is any feeling at stake in this contract but pure, disinterested, faithful love." To this he only replied, "You lie," and not one other word. We went, through half-thawed snow and half-frozen rain, to the house where Christiana and her mother lived. My uncle knew them very well. They were sitting at their breakfast, and were surprised to see us at that hour. "Your servant, ma'am," said my uncle to the mother. "You divine the purpose of my visit, I dare say, ma'am. I understand there is a world of pure, disinterested, faithful love cooped up here. I am happy to bring it all at once to make it complete. I bring you your son-in-law, ma'am, and you your husband, miss. The gentleman is a perfect stranger to me, but I wish him joy of his wise bargain." He snarled at me as he went out, and I never saw him again. "It is altogether a mistake," continued the poor relation, "to suppose that my dear Christiana, over-persuaded and influenced by her mother, married a rich man, the dirt from whose carriage wheels is often, in these changed times, thrown upon me as she rides by. No, no. She married me. The way we came to be married rather sooner than we intended was this. I took a frugal lodging and was saving and planning for her sake, when one day she spoke to me with great earnestness and said, "My dear Michael, I have given you my heart. I have said that I loved you, and I have pledged myself to be your wife. I am as much yours through all changes of good and evil as if we had been married on the day when such words passed between us. I know you well, and know that if we should be separated and our union broken off, your whole life would be shadowed. And all that might, even now, be stronger in your character for the conflict with the world would then be weakened to the shadow of what it is." "God help me, Christiana," said I. "You speak the truth." "Michael," said she, putting her hand in mine in all maidenly devotion, "let us keep apart no longer. It is but for me to say that I can live contented upon such means as you have, and I well know you are happy. I say so from my heart. Strive no more alone. Let us strive together. My dear Michael, it is not right that I should keep secret from you what you do not suspect, but what distresses my whole life. My mother, without considering that what you have lost for me, and on the assurance of my faith, sets her heart on riches, and urges another suit upon me, to my misery. I cannot bear this. For to bear it is to be untrue to you. I would rather share your struggles than look on. I want no better home than you can give me. I know that you will aspire and labor with a higher courage if I am wholly yours. And let it be so when you will." I was blessed indeed that day, and a new world opened to me. We were married in a very little while, and I took my wife to our happy home. That was the beginning of the residence I have spoken of. The castle we have ever since inhabited together dates from that time. All our children have been born in it. Our first child, now married, was a little girl, whom we called Christiana. Her son is so like little Frank that I hardly know which is which. The current impression as to my partner's dealings with me is also quite erroneous. He did not begin to treat me coldly as a poor simpleton when my uncle and I so fatally quarreled, nor did he afterwards gradually possess himself of our business and edge me out. On the contrary, he behaved to me with the utmost good faith and honor. Matters between us took this turn. On the day of my separation from my uncle, and even before the arrival at our counting house of my trunks, which he sent after me, not carriage paid, I went down to our room of business. On our little wharf overlooking the river. And there I told John Spatter what had happened. John did not say, in reply, that rich old relatives were palpable facts and that love and sentiment were moonshine and fiction. He addressed me thus. "Michael," said John, "we were at school together, and I generally had the knack of getting on better than you and making a higher reputation." "You had, John," I returned. "Although," said John, "I borrowed your books and lost them, borrowed your pocket money and never repaid it, got you to buy my damaged knives at a higher price than I had given for them new, and to own to the windows that I had broken." "All not worth mentioning, John Spatter," said I, "but certainly true." "When you were first established in this infant business, which promises to thrive so well," pursued John, "I came to you in my search for almost any employment, and you made me your clerk." "Still not worth mentioning, my dear John Spatter," said I. "Still equally true." "And finding that I had a good head for business, and that I was really useful to the business, you did not like to retain me in that capacity, and thought it an act of justice soon to make me your partner." "Still less worth mentioning than any of those other little circumstances you have recalled, John Spatter," said I, "for I was and am sensible of your merits and my deficiencies." "Now, my good friend," said John, drawing my arm through his, as he had had a habit of doing at school. "While two vessels outside the windows of our counting-house, which were shaped like the stern windows of a ship, went lightly down the river with the tide, as John and I might then be sailing away in company and in trust and confidence on our voyage of life," he continued, "let there, under these friendly circumstances, be a right understanding between us. You are too easy, Michael. You are nobody's enemy but your own. If I were to give you that damaging character among our connection, with a shrug and a shake of the head and a sigh, and if I were further to abuse the trust you place in me—" "But you never will abuse it at all, John," I observed. "Never," said he. "But I am putting a case. I say, and if I were further to abuse that trust by keeping this piece of our common affairs in the dark, and this other piece in the light, and again this other piece in the twilight, and so on, I should strengthen my strength and weaken your weakness day by day, until at last I found myself on the high road to fortune, and you left behind on some bare common, a hopeless number of miles out of the way." "Exactly so," said I. "To prevent this, Michael," said John Spatter, "or the remotest chance of this, there must be perfect openness between us. Nothing must be concealed, and we must have but one interest." "My dear John Spatter," I assured him, "that is precisely what I mean." "And when you are too easy," pursued John, his face glowing with friendship, "you must allow me to prevent that imperfection in your nature from being taken advantage of by anyone. You must not expect me to humor it." "My dear John Spatter," I interrupted, "I don't expect you to humor it. I want to correct it." "And I too," said John. "Exactly so," cried I. "We both have the same end in view, and honorably seeking it, and fully trusting one another, and having but one interest, ours will be a prosperous and happy partnership." "I am sure of it," returned John Spatter. And we shook hands most affectionately. I took John home to my castle, and we had a very happy day. Our partnership throve well. My friend and partner supplied what I wanted, as I had foreseen that he would, and by improving both the business and myself, amply acknowledged any little rise in life to which I had helped him. "I am not," said the poor relation, looking at the fire as he slowly rubbed his hands, "very rich, for I never cared to be that. But I have enough, and am above all moderate wants and anxieties. My castle is not a splendid place, but it is very comfortable, and it has a warm and cheerful air, and is quite a picture of home." Our eldest girl, who is very like her mother, married John Spatter's eldest son. Our two families are closely united in other ties of attachment. It is very pleasant of an evening when we are all assembled together, which frequently happens, and when John and I talk over old times and the one interest there has always been between us. I really do not know, in my castle, what loneliness is. Some of our children or grandchildren are always about it, and the young voices of my descendants are delightful. Oh, how delightful to me to hear. My dearest and most devoted wife, ever faithful, ever loving, ever helpful and sustaining and consoling, is the priceless blessing of my house, from whom all its other blessings spring. We are rather a musical family, and when Christiana sees me, at any time, a little weary or depressed, she steals to the piano and sings a gentle air she used to sing when we were first betrothed. So weak a man am I that I cannot bear to hear it from any other source. They played it once at the theater when I was there with little Frank, and the child said, wondering, "Cousin Michael, whose hot tears are these that have fallen on my hand?" Such is my castle, and such are the real particulars of my life therein preserved. I often take little Frank home there. He is very welcome to my grandchildren, and they play together. At this time of the year, the Christmas and New Year time, I am seldom out of my castle. For the associations of the season seem to hold me there, and the precepts of the season seem to teach me that it is well to be there. "And the castle is," observed a grave, kind voice among the company. "Yes, my castle," said the poor relation, shaking his head as he still looked at the fire, "is in the air. John, our esteemed host, suggests its situation accurately. My castle is in the air. I have done. Will you be so good as to pass the story?" The reading is followed by a deeper literary commentary. Charles Dickens masterfully utilized the canvas of shorter fiction to construct intricate thematic domains that challenged conventional 19th century perceptions of social stratification, domestic isolation, and human resilience. Within this rich creative framework, the short story emerged as a highly sophisticated medium for the author, enabling a focused synthesis of psychological depth and cultural critique that complemented his expansive serialized novels. This aesthetic methodology is particularly vivid in the context of his periodic editorial ventures, where the structured production of designated Christmas numbers for his popular journals Household Words and All the Year Round provided a uniquely collaborative, yet strictly guided platform for narrative experimentation. It was within one of these celebrated festive collections that the evocative psychological landscape of the poor relation unfolded, offering readers a poignant exploration of marginalization that contrasted sharply with the superficial joviality often associated with the season. Through this particular tale, the author delves deeply into the invisible world of folklore, fairy tales, and fantasy, demonstrating how these imaginative elements serve not merely as whimsical escapades, but as essential cognitive tools for coping with the harsh, exclusionary realities of Victorian society. By intertwining the mundane struggles of an impoverished protagonist with the expansive possibilities of a richly imagined inner world, the narrative exposes the profound discrepancies between objective social standing and subjective emotional truth. The poor relation becomes a compelling emblem of the quiet, overlooked individuals inhabiting the fringes of bourgeois families. A figure whose apparent failures in the material marketplace are poignantly counterbalanced by a deeply nurturing alternative reality constructed through memory and longing. This intricate balancing act underscores the author's broader novel-making genius, wherein the boundary between concrete social realism and the ethereal realm of internal fantasy remains perpetually fluid. Ultimately, the narrative operates as a brilliant testament to the author's lifelong commitment to validating the inner lives of the dispossessed, transforming a brief seasonal contribution into an enduring commentary on the human condition that highlights the transformative power of imagination in the face of systemic neglect. Charles Dickens's short story stands as a brilliant, deeply moving exploration of marginalization, memory, and psychological resilience within the rigid framework of Victorian society. Positioned within a festive framing narrative, the text utilizes the warmth of the Christmas hearth to contrast sharply with the cold, isolating realities of economic failure and social alienation. By examining the narrative structure, the author introduces a multi-layered commentary on how the unprosperous are perceived by their successful kin, and how the disenfranchised construct internal sanctuaries to survive systemic indifference. The story opens with a poignant display of social deference that immediately establishes the power dynamics governing the family circle. Michael, the narrator, is described as being remarkably reluctant to take precedence over his more respected relatives. His modest suggestion that John, their esteemed host, should begin the round of storytelling highlights his deeply ingrained sense of inferiority. This initial interaction exposes the subtle cruelties of Victorian family structures, where a person's worth is directly tethered to their financial standing and commercial achievement. When the family insists he speak, it is not out of genuine reverence for his voice, but rather as a perfunctory compliance with festive traditions, forcing the most vulnerable member to expose his shortcomings for the collective entertainment of the prosperous circle. Michael's introductory self-assessment provides a devastating summary of how Victorian society conceptualized personal failure. He acknowledges that he is widely regarded as nobody's enemy but his own, a phrase that functions as a polite euphemism for a lack of worldly ambition and calculated self-interest. Through his gentle voice, he lists the perceived reasons for his downfall. He was too credulous in business, too ridiculously trustful in romance, and insufficiently sharp to secure an inheritance from his uncle. By outlining these perceived flaws, the narrative brilliantly exposes the cold, utilitarian ethics of the 19th century merchant class, a socioeconomic environment where virtues such as trust, faith, and emotional vulnerability are retroactively categorized as fatal flaws and indicators of weakness. The meticulously detailed depiction of Michael's daily routine in London offers a profound topography of urban isolation. His residence in a clean back room along the Clapham Road, where he is explicitly expected not to be at home during the daytime, underscores the domestic conditionalities imposed upon the impoverished gentility. His daily migration to the city, pretending to go to business, serves as a heartbreaking performance designed to maintain a shred of dignity. By placing Michael in iconic financial spaces like Garraway's Coffee House and On 'Change, the text illustrates the profound alienation of a man who exists on the periphery of capital. Standing by the fire, only if tolerated, watching the transactional world move forward, while he remains entirely stagnant and economically invisible. Amidst this landscape of profound loneliness, the relationship between Michael and little Frank emerges as the emotional core of the narrative's reality. Little Frank, characterized as a diffident boy who was easily overlooked in a crowd, represents the next generation of potential outcasts. The silent, intuitive understanding between the aging bachelor and the young boy highlights a shared vulnerability that transcends language. The accidental mention of Frank as Michael's own son by a passing stranger in Lombard Street represents a moment of supreme, bittersweet emotional intensity, bringing tears to the narrator's eyes because it briefly validates a paternal and domestic identity that society has systematically denied him due to his poverty. The tragic dimensions of Michael's existence are further magnified by the genteel disapproval of Frank's mother, who seeks to sever the bond between the two outcasts. Michael's quiet resignation to this separation, planning to walk down to the country school once a month merely to catch a glimpse of the boy from a safe distance without unsettling him, illustrates an extraordinary capacity for selfless love. This profound devotion stands in sharp contrast to the conditional, transactional relationships exhibited by the rest of the family. The miniature portrait of the bright-faced boy that Michael intends to leave to Frank becomes a powerful symbol of a lost youth and an unfulfilled potential. A token of affection that holds absolutely no market value, but carries an immeasurable weight of emotional legacy. The transition to the narrative concerning the castle marks a radical structural and psychological shift in the story. Michael's sudden declaration that the general impression of his life is entirely incorrect serves as an act of imaginative defiance. In this alternative reality, he systematically rewrites every single failure of his past into a triumphant validation of his moral integrity. The bleak, prison-like garret of his youth at Uncle Chill's residence is transformed into the foundational cornerstone of a magnificent internal fortress. Through this narrative inversion, the text explores the absolute necessity of fantasy as a coping mechanism for individuals who have been utterly crushed by the weight of external, material circumstances. The depiction of Uncle Chill stands as one of the most vivid and grotesque characterizations of unbridled avarice in the Dickensian canon. The domestic environment he creates is defined by an absolute lack of physical and emotional warmth, symbolized by the small fire, the candle-lit breakfasts, and the slate-colored morning light. The presence of Betsy Snap, the withered domestic servant constantly rubbing the old man's legs. And the recurring imagery of the adjacent dissecting room cast a gothic, predatory shadow over the household. This unsettling connection between the hoarding of wealth and the anatomical dissection of human beings serves as a searing critique of an economic system that views human life purely as an object to be commodified, consumed, and discarded. In the alternative universe of The Castle, the characters of Christiana and John Spatter are radically reimagined to fulfill Michael's desperate longing for fidelity and honor. Christiana's passionate speech, choosing to share his struggles rather than yield to her mother's mercenary demands, directly subverts the historical reality of her marriage to a wealthier suitor. Similarly, the partnership with John Spatter is rewritten to showcase an idealized version of commercial capitalism, governed by absolute openness, mutual trust, and deep schoolboy affection. By transforming the partner's typical betrayal into a narrative of profound solidarity, Michael creates an imaginative space where human relationships remain completely untainted by the corrupting influence of monetary greed. The domestic bliss detailed within the walls of the castle represents the ultimate fulfillment of Michael's denied desires. The presence of a devoted wife, harmonious musical evenings, and a thriving lineage of grandchildren fills the void left by his real, solitary life in the Clapham Road lodging. The musical motif, where Christiana plays a gentle air to soothe his weariness, highlights the therapeutic power of memory and love. The visceral reaction of little Frank during their theatrical excursion, wondering whose hot tears have fallen upon his hand, serves as a brilliant narrative device where the agonizing grief of Michael's true reality temporarily breaks through the polished surface of his elaborate domestic fantasy. The ultimate revelation regarding the true nature of the castle provides a devastating, emotionally complex conclusion to the story. The realization that this entire grand life exists solely in the air retroactively recontextualizes the entire narrative as an elaborate psychological defense mechanism. Yet, rather than dismissing this fantasy as mere delusion, the narrative validates the castle in the air as a legitimate spiritual sanctuary. For the poor relation, this internal world is the only place where his dignity, his capacity for love, and his moral agency can remain fully preserved from the corrosive, dehumanizing forces of a society that measures a man's humanity entirely by the depth of his pockets. Let us now examine the work through its primary analytical perspective. Charles Dickens's The Poor Relations story serves as a profound critique of Victorian class dynamics, institutionalized marginalization, and the crushing weight of capitalist socio-economic structures on individual identity. At its core, the narrative exposes how the social position of a poor relation is not merely an unfortunate personal circumstance, but a systematically constructed role within the 19th century bourgeois family framework. The family, acting as a microcosm of broader Victorian society, demands a rigid adherence to economic utility, financial independence, and commercial success. When the protagonist, Michael, fails to secure these capitalistic benchmarks, he is systematically stripped of his authority, voice, and place within both the familial hierarchy and the wider social order. The opening framework of the story establishes the collective pressures and invisible hierarchies that govern social interactions. Michael is inherently hesitant to speak, feeling reluctant to take precedence of so many respected members of the family. This reluctance stems from an internalized sense of inferiority dictated by his low economic status. The family members, led by the prosperous host, John, tolerate Michael's presence, but enforce a strict, silent code of conduct. This collective pressure is evident in Michael's admission that his current limited income is a topic to which John, our esteemed host, wishes me to make no further allusion. By silencing the reality of poverty during a festive gathering, the bourgeois family maintains a facade of middle-class harmony while simultaneously reinforcing the marginalization of its economically unproductive members. The family's one voice that forces Michael to speak is not born out of genuine inclusivity, but out of a ritualistic demand for entertainment from a dependent. Highlighting how power within the familial institution rests entirely with those who hold economic capital. Michael's daily routine further highlights the profound sense of alienation experienced by the urban underclass in Victorian London. His migration from his lodging in Clapham Road to the financial hubs of the city, Garraway's Coffee House and Change, is a performative ritual driven by societal norms. He leaves his room at 9 o'clock on pretense of going to business because Victorian middle-class norms dictate that a respectable man must participate in the market. Michael's aimless wandering through counting houses, where he is merely tolerated, illustrates the psychological toll of being a non-entity in a society that measures human worth exclusively through transactional value. The physical spaces he inhabits reflect this social exclusion. He stands by the fire only if permitted, and he faces restrictions in his lodging, where fire is expensive and being objected to by the family on account of its giving trouble and making a dirt. Here, the family at the lodging house enforces economic austerity, treating human comfort as a logistical nuisance, which mirrors the broader capitalist view of the working poor as superfluous elements in the machinery of production. The character of Uncle Chill represents the absolute radicalization of Victorian capitalist values, where human relationships are entirely subordinated to avarice. Uncle Chill's domestic environment is an institutional manifestation of economic greed. His house is an unwarmed fortress, where the physical cold mirrors the emotional desolation. The presence of Betsy Snap, the withered servant whose head Uncle Chill grips like an object, illustrates the dehumanizing nature of absolute economic dominance. When Michael confesses his love for the penniless Christiana, Uncle Chill reacts not with familial concern, but with ferocious hostility. Branding Michael a fool, an idiot, and a contemptible dog. In Chill's worldview, marriage is not a sacred or emotional union, but a cold financial speculation. By choosing a partner without a fortune, Michael commits the ultimate sin against the capitalist ethos. He prioritizes human emotion over capital accumulation. Chill's repudiation of Michael is an institutional expulsion. He banishes him from the family line of succession, demonstrating how wealth dictates kinship and how poverty dissolves blood ties in a purely transactional society. Furthermore, The character of John Spatter serves as a complex psychological mirror to the cutthroat realities of the Victorian business world. In Michael's fantasy, The Castle in the Air, Spatter is the idealized partner who embodies total honor, mutual trust, and transparent collaboration. However, this idealized vision is explicitly constructed to counteract the grim social reality that Michael has actually experienced. In the real world, as implied by the family's common assumptions, Spatter likely exploited Michael's credulous and unbusinesslike nature to edge him out of the company. The narrative structure thus highlights a sociological truth. In a hyper-competitive economic landscape, those who possess attributes like empathy, trust, and an easygoing nature are systematically devoured by individuals who understand how to navigate the high road to fortune. Michael's defense mechanism, his fantasy of a prosperous partnership where Spatter protects his weaknesses, demonstrates the deep trauma inflicted by a predatory economic system that penalizes altruism and rewards ruthless self-interest. The structural contrast between the bleak room in Clapham Road and the opulent imaginary castle shows how the socio-economic reality breaks the human psyche, forcing it to construct alternative worlds where capitalistic exploitation is sanitized into fraternal devotion. Finally, Michael's relationship with little Frank underscores the transmission of class vulnerability across generations. Michael sees in Frank a reflection of his own diffident and retiring disposition, noting that in the crowded, competitive Victorian world, such a child is bound to be soon run over and forgotten. The societal norms of gentility are enforced by Frank's mother, who comes of a highly genteel family and rather disapproves of our being too much together. This disapproval is rooted in class anxiety. The mother fears that contact with a failed, poor relation will contaminate her son's social standing and impede his future upward mobility. Michael's realization that he is a superfluous something to everyone but him reveals the ultimate victory of Victorian social structures over the individual. He accepts his alienation, internalizing the capitalist judgment that his life has no intrinsic value because it failed to find an economically productive place in this great assembly. Moreover, the sociological weight of the story is deepened by the institutional spaces of London that Dickens deliberately evokes. Lombard Street, Westminster Bridge, and the Royal Exchange are not mere geographic backdrops. They are the architectural monuments of institutional power and imperial wealth. When Michael takes little Frank to look at the outside of the monument or walk down Lombard Street to admire the great riches there, he is engaging in a form of socio-economic voyeurism. They are excluded from the inside of these structures, forced to look at the outside of wealth and historical legacy. This spatial segregation underscores the invisible boundaries that separate the bourgeois elite from the discarded populations of the city. Even the accidental mention of Frank as Michael's little son by a passing gentleman brings foolish tears to Michael's eyes, because it temporarily offers him an institutional identity. That of a respectable father within a traditional family unit, which his economic failure has denied him. Dickens uses this brief emotional breakthrough to illustrate how deeply the lack of social validation wounds the human spirit. forcing the marginalized individual to survive on the crumbs of accidental societal recognition. A second perspective reveals further dimensions of the work. An eco-critical reading of the Poor Relations story reveals how Charles Dickens utilizes the built environment, atmospheric conditions, and spatial topographies to mirror and critique the psychological and social alienation of his characters. Throughout the text, the urban landscape of London is presented not as a neutral background, but as an oppressive, artificial construct that actively suppresses natural human impulses and ecological values. The stark contrast between the sterile, frozen city spaces and the distant, idealized natural realms highlights the ecological degradation that accompanies industrial capitalism. The depiction of Uncle Chill's estate serves as a premier example of an environmentally hostile, anti-ecological space. The house is explicitly described as unwarmed, operating in direct opposition to natural cycles of warmth and vitality. The weather outside, featuring half-thawed snow and half-frozen rain, penetrates the domestic sphere, turning it into a site of physical and psychological stagnation. Within this space, the large bay window, which the rain had marked in the night as if with the tears of houseless people, establishes a direct connection between natural atmospheric phenomena and human suffering. Furthermore, the window stares out onto a raw yard with a cracked stone pavement and some rusted iron railings half uprooted. This imagery of cracked stone and rusted iron signifies a landscape where nature has been thoroughly paved over, subdued, and left to decay under the weight of industrial neglect. The ultimate horror of this built environment is the adjacent ugly outbuilding that had once been a dissecting room, a space dedicated to the literal fragmentation and mechanistic analysis of biological life. Reinforcing the capitalist view of nature and the human body as mere material to be exploited. In contrast to these rigid, decaying urban interiors, the River Thames and the natural elements offer a fluid, albeit commercialized, presence. When Michael describes his business quarters on the little wharf overlooking the river, the two vessels moving lightly down the river with the tide introduce a rare moment of ecological rhythm into the narrative. The tide represents a natural force that continues to operate beneath the structures of the counting house, offering a metaphor for the voyage of life in trust and confidence. However, this natural movement is immediately co-opted by the capitalist framework of the shipping industry, illustrating how Victorian society systematically channels ecological systems into pathways of commercial profit. The river is not a site of wild nature, but a highly regulated economic corridor. The ultimate ecological escape in the text is found in the rural landscape where little Frank is sent to school. Michael notes that the child will be at play upon the heath, a geographical space that represents wild, uncommodified nature in stark opposition to the cracked stone pavement of London. The heath offers a sanctuary for the child's retiring disposition, away from the crowded urban streets where he is at risk of being soon run over. Yet, even this natural sanctuary is heavily policed by societal norms, as Michael anticipates having to view Frank from a distance to avoid unsettling him. The physical distance Michael must maintain from the heath reflects his permanent exile from both healthy human relationships and the restorative power of the natural world. Furthermore, the motif of fire and heat throughout the text serves as an ecological indicator of social and physical well-being. In Michael's actual life in Clapham Road, fire is expensive and being objected to by the family on account of its giving trouble and making a dirt. By withholding heat, the urban lodging system denies the individual access to the basic elemental comfort required for survival. Treating the natural element of fire as an industrial pollutant or a domestic inconvenience. This denial of heat stands in direct contrast to the opening scene, where the family sits in a goodly circle by the Christmas fire. The Christmas fire represents a temporary, ritualistic reclamation of natural warmth and communal unity. Yet it remains an artificial exception to the baseline of urban coldness that defines Michael's life. The one dim candle behind which Uncle Chill huddles similarly underscores the scarcity of light and warmth in a world dominated by avarice. Through this systematic manipulation of light, heat, and space, Dickens demonstrates how the Victorian-built environment induces a state of ecological alienation. Severing the marginalized individual from the nurturing rhythms of the natural world and trapping them within a cold, mechanical landscape. Finally, here are several companion works worth reading. To extend the exploration of sociological marginalization and environmental alienation found in The Poor Relations Story. Several key Victorian and industrial-era novels serve as excellent companion pieces. Charles Dickens's own masterpiece, Great Expectations, functions as a direct thematic extension of these concerns. The novel follows the life of Pip, an orphan who navigates the rigid class structures of Victorian England. Just as Michael constructs a castle in the air to cope with his financial failure and social rejection, Pip is seduced by the illusion of wealth and gentility, only to discover that the upper classes are governed by a coldness reminiscent of Uncle Chill. The physical setting of Saddis House, decaying and choked with weeds, closely mirrors the rusted railings and cracked pavement of Uncle Chill's yard, reinforcing the idea that moral and environmental decay go hand in hand with economic greed. Another crucial companion text is Dickens's Hard Times, which provides a more aggressive sociological and environmental critique of industrial capitalism. The fictional Coketown serves as the ultimate realization of the paved-over, unnatural urban space hinted at in the descriptions of London's financial district. In Hard Times, human beings are reduced to hands, stripped of their individuality and forced into rigid transactional routines, just like Michael's aimless daily loop through the city. The total suppression of imagination and human sentiment under Thomas Gradgrind's philosophy of facts directly parallels Uncle Chill's anger at Michael's unbusinesslike faith in love. And relationships. Outside of Dickens's bibliography, Herman Melville's short story, Bartleby the Scrivener, offers an extraordinary cross-Atlantic companion perspective on urban alienation and institutional pressures. Set in the financial heart of Wall Street, Melville's narrative portrays a clerk who, much like Michael, becomes a superfluous presence within a commercial enterprise. While Michael responds to his economic exclusion by retreating into a vivid, comforting fantasy world, Bartleby chooses a path of absolute passive resistance, famously declaring, "I would prefer not to. The sterile office spaces of Wall Street and the confining brick walls that Bartleby stares at echo the restrictive, expensive lodgings of Clapham Road and the unheated counting houses of London. Highlighting a universal capitalist condition where human worth is entirely divorced from psychological and ecological health.